Welcome to Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us again. We're glad to be back another week. Just a couple things coming up here. We have Next Step classes tonight. That's kind of the new membership class for First Baptist. If you're watching this and want to figure out how to get in, just contact Pastor Chuck and he'll figure out what's going on and how to get you in the membership for the church. We also have tubing coming up on August 13th. That's a the youth and we'll call it youth and other trip. We have some other people join us, but it's primarily for the teenagers, but we have some other people that can join us. If you have a tube, we need life vests for that. We have a lot of tubes, but we need some life vests. So if you have life vests we could borrow, or you want to join us, just contact me, or if it's next week, Vicky, I'll be away next week. Then August 28th, we're doing our last outdoor worship of the summer. We're going to do, it's at Weirs Dam, Covered Bridge Park at 6, and we're going to have some water games for the kids put on by the youth, and we're going to have some hot dogs grilled by John Squire, and just have a nice time of hanging out right before school starts. I do know that's the day before school starts, so I know a lot of parents might be a little tired getting their kids ready, but we're going to try and wrap summer up in a cool note there with some fellowship and some hanging out and just praising. And then we have Rally Day on September 11th and the Senior Social on September 17th. And that's kind of our big events coming up here in the next month. So I listened to your sermon this morning, and I don't get to sit in on Sunday mornings very often. I'm running around.
You're busy.
So I listened to it this morning, and you said something that I caught was interesting to me. You called Barnabas a disruptor. We just had this conversation with my daughter. So certain words have certain associations. You know, I was talking about how every decision we make there's a built-in consequence to it, and she associated consequence with negative. And like you could have we don't call it positive consequences, but that's what they are. But disruptor, Barnabas was always taught to me. Barnabas is the son of encouragement, right? And to hear him called as a disruptor, my antenna went up, and I'm like, wasn't being a disruptor bad? Like, isn't that kind of something that you don't want to be? Because you're, when I view disruptor, I think of the kid in class who won't stop talking. The teacher's trying to teach, and he's just making things messy and ugly and not effective. But that's not who Barnabas was. So you had a cool definition of disruptor, and I just want to kind of talk about how that fits into church life nowadays.
Interesting enough, that kid that's usually making a mess in class is usually a disruptor down the line.
Yeah, somewhere.
But Barnabas, the disruptor in the culture, when I talk about disruptor, I think this was Google's definition. It's a company, person, or form of technology that causes significant change in an industry or market by means of innovation, leading to new ideas and new methods. And in Barnabas' case, he was part of the innovative process, the disrupting process of the gospel in the culture. The message, Jim Collins says, a truly innovative organization has a core ideology that preserves over time. And we don't have a core ideology, we have a core relationship with Jesus. When you think of disruptor, you think of the cell phone. When I was born, I had a black and white television, I remember when I first was born. The idea of going from a phone on the wall with a cord and everybody connected, and there's an old show, I forget what the name of it was, Green Acres. Green Acres was known, it was back in the 70s, it was the old phones where you had the wooden thing on the side, and they do this, and they had the operator and stuff. We've gone from that in the 40s and 50s, and I hope I'm getting those numbers right, to my wife and I laughing about, when she would talk to boys or something, didn't want anybody to hear her, they had this long cord, and she'd take it all the way down the hallway and get in the closet on the long cord. Now, somebody in that time frame, somebody said, hey, what if we could have phones that could be on everybody? It was a pipe dream, be on everybody at one time. And how awesome would that be that everybody could connect with each other all the time? And they became disruptors in the culture because, Ma Bell wasn't very excited about it. If you remember them, oh man, we're going to take all the wires away. And they're not totally all the way, but most people we know, they just have cell phones now. They don't have a landline. And So it disrupts the culture, John, the Tesla idea. Tesla disrupted the culture with the electric car. So now electric cars are becoming, even though I figured out the whole big deal of it, but there are disruptors in culture that are consistently pushing the ball down the field and saying, okay, and as believers, when we think, the core ideology, things that developed from the idea of being a disruptor, for us, it's the person of Jesus Christ, and we disrupt the culture in a positive way. We mix it up a little bit and say, hey, there's a whole new way to live. Now, we're not new disruptors. Barnabas and Paul were on the front end of being disruptors. Peter, James, all those guys, front end of being disruptors, but it was no different other than their disruption was used by God to present the opportunity for all men and women to make Jesus Christ Lord of their life and spend eternity with Him. And that's what I was getting at, because we don't. So to many people, the message of the gospel is an offense, and because it will disrupt their life in so many ways. Because they think, well, wait a second, if I make Jesus Christ Lord of my life, there's certain things that in their minds, there's certain things that have to change.
You're looking at two guys who didn't think they were going to be pastors.
Exactly.
Giving your life to Jesus, and he disrupted
that there's a disruptor, when we allow, and that's something I think that holds people back from really seeking the Lord sometimes, because man, what if I'm really good at this? Well, what if He calls me into this, or man, He called me into this, and that's too much of a disruption. I have it all figured out with my 2.4 kids and my this and that and this and that, but we are called in many ways to be disruptors in the world. But it's interesting. Jesus didn't say He didn't look at them and say, I'm going to love you if you agree with me. He said, I love you anyways, but let me show you the path. And it was a disruption. I mean, they killed Him. Think about it. He was an ultimate disruptor in a culture that eventually killed Him. That was the Father's will. He went to the cross. He died. Talk about a disruptor when He looks down and here all these guys are standing around. They've been mocking Him and yelling at Him. And a disruptor looks at this and he knows the whole plan going on. It's the most amazing disruption of all history, where everybody around them is on a path to be separated from God. And He looks down and says, forgive them, for they know not what they do. He modeled for us incredible love in that moment. The thief next to Him, disruptor. You are Messiah. Paradise. All those things are part of the disruptive process of the gospel in our lives. The gospel disrupts, and commitment as a fully devoted follower of Christ disrupts. And Barnabas, I love what Barnabas did, because Paul was the apostle Paul, Saul who became Paul. He was an incredible disruptor. And every time we turn around, Peter and Paul are always getting smacked around. They're always getting, this passage this week, Peter's in jail again, and Herod Agrippa's getting ready to kill him, and the angel of the Lord shows up. Yeah. Talk about disruptor. Had disrupted Herod's plans. But as people of the kingdom, this is one thing that kind of catches me. We are part of the disruption of culture. And it's not an antagonistic disruption of culture. It doesn't work. I've talked about that. But it's a relatable, it's relating to people that don't know Jesus yet, stepping into their life. And we just automatically become disruptors because we are sharing a message of hope, love, grace, and peace that God has prepared beforehand for them. And I get excited about these things because, I talked about the fact, I think in second service, I have people in my life that are disruptors in the culture. Really, our church is very much a disruptor of the culture with the company she runs. And just, it's amazing to listen to them think, because when you're around a believer who's a disruptor, they always want to make life better for someone. we always want to and we know we can't do it, but God can do it.
Yeah, so I'm prepping for a few weeks. I'm going on vacation, I come back, and then I preach. And I'm prepping for Acts 16, where the Spirit's, it's a great passage on the Spirit's guiding. And thinking about being disruptible, if that's the right word, allowing yourself to be open enough to what God is trying to do at that moment. And I think about Jesus as a disruptor of the religious system that was in place. They thought they had it all figured out, right? They
still do.
It was down to the T. Everything was every T was crossed, every I was dotted, and they had it all figured out. And then Jesus comes and says, no. And there's, I view that disruptor thing as a whole on many different levels. It can be, I have my itinerary for the day, but God says go do this, right? I have my plan for my life. It was not to be a pastor, but God said go do this. I have my method of ministry, but God says, have you thought about doing it this way? And there's different ways that the innovation, the creativity of the Holy Spirit of God on display through people if we're in tune with the Holy Spirit. That's why I really hope, I'm not speaking out here, I really hope to get Matt Kay on here to talk about the Spirit-filled life thing that Crew does and not think, but like his perspective on the Spirit-filled life and being so aware of what the Spirit is up to that we're willing to allow our plans, our goals to be disrupted by what God is up to be interrupted and moved and reorganized.
Isn't that the question? The Spirit-filled life, and that's a great question to ask yourself every morning. Have I left margin in my day? Am I open to the Spirit's disruption in my calendar?
Right.
Am I open? Because people ask me all the time, do you love what you do? I said, yeah. They said, why do you love what you do? I said, because I never live the same day twice. I just don't, because there are disruptions that occur. We just received 2 phone calls of 2 people we love that are in crisis, and that changes our days immediately. Some people that would drive them totally nuts, they're counting beans. 1, 2, I can't do anything. 3, 4. We don't live that way. We have moments where God disrupts and says, okay, I'm calling you over here. That's the privilege of being at First Baptist Church. We have the bandwidth to do that, where and being able to step into these moments, because are you open to the disruption? Are you open to a life that's not A to Z every day, but there's detours through it, that God's taking you into moments where he's going to disrupt somebody else's life with your message. And Barnabas is I think one of the greatest things about Barnabas is one of the first things he did, he takes a look at everything going on and he goes, I got to go get Saul. And he goes and he finds Saul in his hometown, and he's doing ministry, and and he's got a great resume already. He brings Saul, who became Paul, and he brings him, and they spend a whole year in training. And it kind of reminds me, I feel like Paul was a grad assistant. Like Barnabas was a little bit ahead at that point in many ways in the organizational understanding of how the church was being developed, and Paul was being brought in as that arm to be the head of moving out to the rest of the world. A great story. I'm in Colorado, and I run into Andy Stanley's missions pastor. And it wasn't his missions pastor, it was assistant to the missions pastor. And long story short, I recruited the missions pastor's daughter at Andy Stanley's church back in high school. And she was on staff with Andy. And he was so funny, because he said when they were starting their church, they did everything. And then one day, all of a sudden, these people kept going, oh, we want to be missionaries. Well, they hadn't planned for that. That was, Andy was looking at everything. And from what I was picking up from the story, so Andy goes to this guy and he goes, I need you to run my missions. I mean, and there were disruptors in the congregation going, man, we're doing great, we're worshiping, we're discipleship, but what about going out into the world? And they're like, oh, and that disruption of the church led to a phenomenal mission program. And that happens in church too. We see somebody in our church, their life is disrupted. A man right now on the mission field in one of the Indian reservations. His picture's over on my desk, but God stepped into his life and said, hey, I want you to lead teams of I think he's with young people really, on their way to do missions. And that is, God disrupted his life in a way that he does that every year. And we listened to George this morning. He was talking about God disrupted his life with teens. You know, God disrupted your life and you became a Baptist.
Yeah, that's,
You know?
well, that's the cool thing. Because again, I don't know that I'll ever not see disruptor as a negative term,
Mhm.
because just because of how my brain is working.
Mhm.
But when we allow God to get a hold of our plans and change them for his glory, there's something on the other side that honors God,
Mhm.
right? Whether it be a change in us that allows us to be more in line with his word and his teaching, and we live that life that's more honoring to him, or it's impacting somebody else with the gospel, or it's a ministry startup, or there's any number of different things.
Mhm.
But when we allow God to get a hold of our plans and change them for his glory, there's some sort of God moment
Mhm.
afterwards where he does something awesome that we're like, oh man, I didn't even think that was possible, or I didn't know that existed, or I didn't think how that could happen.
Well, you look back at the beginning of COVID in March 2020. There was a major negative disruption
Mhm.
in the culture with COVID. But the churches that survived that and even thrived through that realized it was time for disruption in
Mhm.
the way they did things.
Right.
And you and I are doing this today partly because that was something that we realized, okay, it'd be great to add something to our repertoire of communication.
Mhm.
Major disruption in our church is that 90% of people that come to Church of First Baptist wouldn't have come 3 years ago because 90% of them watch online before they come. A major disruption in our culture right now, and it's turned into a positive because we've been pushed towards this. God is disrupting the generations in the church, and he's making us very aware of where there's weaknesses and strengths in between, and not just in relation with generations, but the existence of generations within the church. And it's making us have to think about things that honestly were kind of very easy 25 years ago in the local church. The disrupting of the culture and how identity is seen and all the things that we are working with, those disruptions in the culture, we look at them and say, okay, yes, there's some things that, man, we're going, wow, this is amazing how culture is moving so fast. But as the body of Christ, as leaders in the church, we walk in hope, joy, love, and peace. So we have a grounding that came from 2,000 years ago where disruption occurred on the cross.
Mhm.
God changed everything, and we have leaders that have walked through the centuries, and now we stand in this moment, and like you and I looked at church this week, and we're like, wow, God's at work, and God's moving. People are getting saved. People are getting focused in, and we've had a lot of fun getting focused in on discipleship and with Acts, just learning. But this week there's a major disruption with Rhoda. It's going to be an interesting sermon. But this character we're going to talk about, Rhoda, and there's a major disruption in the church, and God just shows up, and it's going to remind us that God is going to move, and another thing we talked about in this. We don't have to create the program. God has already created the program. God is already moving. We just have to step into what he's doing.
That's why I said allow God to disrupt our plans, because I think that way. I'm I'm guilty. Number one most wanted. I'm planning things out to the T, right? And I go, okay, then because I've been told people part of what I think I'm good at is you tell me where you want to go. I know where we're at now to help us get there, and I'm guilty of planning it out so hard that so far and so stiff and rigid into planning that there's, is there room for God to move that? And that's where, we need to make sure that each step of the way, it's like, okay, where is God moving? Maybe it's an offshoot here. Maybe it's scrapping the whole thing because this isn't working. Who knows? But making sure that we're stepping in line with what God has lined up for us to do, instead of trying to force God into my plans and my will for where I want Him to show up.
Yeah, step one, step two, step three, step four.
Yeah, absolutely. No, but you said it too, because you can't. And we both had different experience. We had the same experience in different ways, but we realized both that we can't force anyone to come to Christ.
No.
It's a work of God and a work of the Holy Spirit that is what transforms someone's heart to believe, and you can't force that. And if I can't force that, then why would I be able to force any of the other things that our goal is to lead people to Christ? Our goal is that. I can't force these other things to be like, oh, I know exactly how I can do this. It's got to be stepping into what God has already lined up and already have set in motion for us to walk in.
Well, it's empowered and activated by God.
Yeah, absolutely.
The idea, we were going through this list about the mission of the church. The mission of the church is empowered by God. There is no program out there that gets close to standing and walking in God's revealed will. And then the ministry is activated across cultural boundaries, and we see the world, we see all people as kingdom work. People who don't know Jesus are all kingdom work. We teach, we preach, we assimilate, we sit in small groups, we learn, and then we see spirit-led teams developed, and then we walk, and this is so important. And Barnabas and Paul had a moment later on with John Mark and some of the things they were dealing with, that unity and steadfastness. Our unity will be attacked, and it will be attacked because we've seen it through the centuries. The church, we're seeing it. This is a very interesting time as we're seeing a lot of these mega churches and things that are just having all these major issues with unity, with leaders stepping off the grid a little bit, and the unity. We have to be so careful because we want to keep that unity, and we want the authentic commitment to each other and to the Lord. But I just remember one of my mentors one time he said, work like it's all up to you, recognizing that God's the one at work and he will use, and he was really saying you're stepping into what God is already doing, and that you want to be motivated, you want to be just working hard, but just realizing that the harvest is there and God's at work, and we can't grow our church. It's fine when somebody comes in, well, Chuck, you're going to grow our church. No, we can't grow our church. Only God can grow the church. Only, we look at some of the holes we have in ministry right now, in student ministry, some of the things we're working on really hard. You can't fix that. Chad can't fix that. I can't. Only God can do it. And we're seeing him move in a marvelous way. So am I good, Disruptor? You feeling better about the word?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
But thanks for joining us again this week. Hopefully this is encouraging to you, and just want to encourage you to look for the Spirit's work around you and what God is up to, and allow that to disrupt your plans and your models and methods so that you can step into what God is at work around you. So thanks for joining us, and have a great week.
God bless you.